When we talk to people about where to relocate in the world, one of the biggest questions is not just the country, it's not just the taxes, it's not just the specific structure that you would want or something like that. It is the general part of the world and the culture that you're in. And it turns out, I think there's some clear, distinct differences between different areas of the world. So over this video and a few in the future, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the differences between those parts of the world culturally and in other factors to help you decide where might be an area that you might most be interested in going. So today we're going to talk about Eastern Europe versus Southeast Asia. Which is best? What are the pros and cons of each? If you guys have opinions about this, put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what it is that you think, and you'll find out in a minute what I think. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. If you would like help with relocating abroad, setting up international structures, opening bank accounts, getting residencies, citizenships, figuring out what is best for you. I'm Michael, this is Offshore Citizen. We help you with custom international holistic plans, essentially, figuring out what is the best solution for you and actually implementing those solutions both for individuals and for businesses. If you are interested in that, you can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so let's start with just kind of the basics. So when I'm referring to Eastern Europe, sometimes people would refer to this, a bunch of it, as actually Central Europe. So there's a little bit of a debate around what constitutes Eastern Europe. I am basically talking about former communist countries. So this would be the Balkans area. So we're talking about Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, maybe not Slovenia. Slovenia's kind of got some little unique things about it. Bosnia, Albania, Macedonia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, probably you maybe would throw in Slovakia in there, maybe Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, something like that, as well as possibly Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, probably not any more than that. And we'll leave Russia in its own little thing, although it's going to have a lot of the same characteristics as some of these. So that general area. And certainly we're talking about some things that obviously vary from one area to another, right? I've done some videos specifically comparing, for example, Sofia, Bulgaria, where I am today. You can see the nice view, with, say, Tbilisi, Georgia, or with Belgrade, Serbia, etc. So, there are nuances to each one and preferences, but there are generalities, and so I'm going to mostly be focusing on the generalities in this particular video. And then we can obviously look at Southeast Asia. Normally when we talk about Southeast Asia, usually the places people are looking at are Thailand, Malaysia. We're going to exclude Singapore because it's kind of its own thing. Indonesia, in particular Bali, maybe Philippines, Vietnam. In theory, it could be Cambodia, it could be some of these, but usually those are farther out and not likely to come up. So primarily we're talking about the most common three I would say I hear people referring to are Thailand, Malaysia, Bali, and so we can include those, but there's a bunch of others as well. And again, there's some commonalities. So I think the first most obvious difference clearly is the weather, right? If you're somebody who likes hot and humid, then Southeast Asia is probably for you. If you're somebody who doesn't like hot and humid, they like it to be colder during the winter and not as warm during the summer, but a little less humid, then generally Eastern Europe is going to be much better. Now, obviously there's some variation between where you are in Eastern Europe. Generally speaking, a lot of the portion that I'm talking about is, I would describe as somewhat mild, but keep in mind I'm from Canada, right? So to me, if it's not -20, how cold is it really in the winter? Really cold is -40, and so I would say, for example, here in Sofia, where we are today, you're typically getting like -10 would be sort of winter temperatures, which I would consider to be semi-mild. If you were on the coast of Montenegro, someplace like Herceg-Novi or Tivat or something like that, you're looking at, maybe 10 degrees that it gets down to, but quite rainy, maybe 5 degrees, but basically never snows in that area. Whereas here, you can see there's a mountain up there, there's skiing in the country, etc. So, and if you were to go to Varna, the coast on the Bulgarian seaside, the Black Sea, or Burgas, then you would see again that it's more mild than it is in this area. Today I'm going to Plovdiv, and so Plovdiv is a little bit colder in certain cases than Sofia is, but kind of similar. And so this is just one example of an area. Obviously, you'll get some diversity across Georgia, you'll get some diversity across Romania, some diversity across Serbia. Serbia is maybe, it's all inland, so more or less similar in that regard. But anyway, I would say just in general, you're talking about a cooler climate. So that's something that some people prefer, right? The next thing that I think is worth noting is depending on what you like, if you're, say, dating or something. I mean, some people love Asians and, whatever a person's preferences are, or they love Eastern Europeans, or they love Latinos, or they love, whatever it is that you're into. Clearly, if you're looking for that, then you have a different group of people you're surrounded with. Surprise, surprise, right? So it's going to be, just a personal preference, clearly, in this regard. I tend to prefer warm climates to cool climates, which is why I live most of the year in Dubai, but, is one way or the other kind of going to be the same. The next thing that I would look at is if we're talking about language. Now, this one's a hard one to say because it really varies country to country quite a lot, but just in general, I would observe that there's a lot more English as sort of a first or close to first language countries in Southeast Asia than there are in Eastern Europe. It's not a massive difference, but I do notice that there is a degree of discomfort in, say, Serbia that I would not get in, say, Malaysia. Okay, again, depending a little bit where you are in Malaysia, there's some variance, but I just find if English is your thing, and we are on an English channel, at least I think you're listening to me in English, so that's good. If you were looking at, Spanish or something like that, that might be a little bit different. Romania happens to be, the Romanian language is quite similar to Italian. There's about an 80% overlap. I think it's 79% or something. But anyway, so, maybe that's something good for you. Hungarian, just nobody understands it. It's completely a mystery how you have Hungarian in there. Okay, you have stuff like Thai, great. A lot of people are not going to learn Thai. People are not going to learn things like tonal languages in most cases, but some people do. I have some good friends who spent a number of years living in Thailand and learned the language, learned a bunch of these languages, so that could be something for you to consider. But just what I find interesting is that it's probably easier to learn some of the languages in Eastern Europe than some of the languages in Southeast Asia. Again, you can't generalize to them all, but some of them. However, I find that there are more countries where English is more widely spoken in Southeast Asia than in Eastern Europe, although to be fair, they both are okay, right? They're, again, depending on the country. So that would be another thing. What about in terms of cost? So they're both fairly inexpensive. Generally speaking, I've just spent I've been traveling since May, so a long time traveling around. And I just came from Canada before here. I was in London before that. I was in Paris a short while before that. The prices in Bulgaria are, much, much nicer, much better by far than you're going to get in these types of places. And similar, I've often mentioned to people that I think Malaysia has the highest quality of life per dollar spent in the world. Certainly in a bunch of these areas, you can get things much cheaper than a bunch of other parts of the world. So that's something. Let's talk about healthcare. Healthcare, I would say broadly speaking, again, we're generalizing, but broadly speaking is better in Southeast Asia than it is in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, there are some exceptions. It depends particularly on what procedures you're looking at, et cetera. But in general, I find there's a lot of fairly poor healthcare. So that's something that you can keep in mind. What about in terms of what we'll call quality of service? So Southeast Asia tends to be a service-oriented culture. Eastern Europe is not a service-oriented culture. I think maybe this has something to do with the roots of communism, kind of everybody being equal, et cetera. But for whatever reason, there's not a strong service culture in Eastern Europe, whereas Southeast Asia has quite a service-oriented culture. And so that's kind of nice. It's, I would say, more common to, if you're interested in getting maids, getting cooks, getting, all these different things, it's a more common thing. Obviously, it's famous around the world to have, Filipino nannies or something. When I was in Canada, this was a thing people would get, et cetera. So definitely more service culture there. On the other hand, what I find about that, the downside of it is, and this may just be my experience, but I find in a lot of countries in Eastern Europe, or sorry, in Southeast Asia, there's more of a separation between the locals and the expats. I find it more difficult, and I noticed this with a bunch of my friends as well. Like, I'll have people in Thailand and all their friends are expats. They don't have Thai friends. Whereas, some people will ask me, they'll say, what do you think about Bulgaria? What do you think about Sofia? And the thing that I always tell them is I have really good friends here. And, a bunch of these people are locals. So that's great. I think that integration is quite a bit nicer. I feel as though if you go to Thailand and you live there, you may have a wonderful time. I love Thailand. There's lots to appreciate about it. But are you going to be Thai? No, you're not going to be Thai, right? Whereas you can meld into the culture much better, at least in my experience, in Eastern Europe. At least coming from my background. If you're, I don't know, maybe coming from China or something, or Japan or something like that, maybe you're going to find it a little bit different, but that's an observation that I have. Clearly the food is going to be more in favor of one versus the other. I would say there's, again, like we have a fairly good food scene in some place like Budapest, but I would say the options tend to be broader in Southeast Asia than I find in Eastern Europe. However, there's a different preference towards Slavic food as well as Turkish, so Middle Eastern food in Eastern Europe. Probably as a result of Ottoman occupation for a bunch of years. That's a lot there. So that you're going to have a much easier time finding those types of foods, and much more difficult if you prefer Asian food. So although there are a bunch of sushi restaurants in, say, Sofia, the variety is just not going to be as good. I know of one Nepalese restaurant, which is, I could point out kind of the direction of it there, but there's not a lot of that. So if you're looking for Asian cuisine, if you love Asian cuisine, etc., probably you're going to have less in this part of the world than there. So again, that's kind of a preference for you. In terms of the people and the culture, what I typically find is the Southeast Asian cultures are very warm, very polite, that's kind of their way, and that's a lot less in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe tends to be some of the coldest cultures that I've experienced on the surface. The trade-off of this is some people would describe it as a more real culture. If you're dealing with people in, let's say, Philippines, just to pick on it, but it could be that area, there's a big thing about saving face, right? And so somebody will not tell you, oh, hey, I don't like working with you, so I'm going to quit. They're going to say, Michael, I'm so sorry. My mother in the villages is very sick, and I have to go and take care of her, and this sort of thing. So that's quite different from Eastern Europe. So depending on your preference, I mean, it's just a preference, right? There's not one versus the other that is good. I think that for me, maybe it comes from Canada, politeness, kind of Canadians are famous for this, but I would much rather people smile at me, even if it's a fake smile, most of the time, than not. Personal preference. However, then when I'm working with people, and this is kind of the interesting contradiction, right? When I'm working with people, I want people who are real with me and honest. So most of the people who I employ are from Eastern Europe, and they're wonderful, we love them, etc. But another thing that I notice in Eastern Europe is that when you get to know people, they're very warm. It's kind of that surface level thing that's an issue, and locals will tell me kind of their experience is more or less the same. So those are things that I think give a reasonable little overview. For me, if I had to choose long-term, partially due to the weather and the climate and access to beaches and things like this, and then I think the biggest thing, which I kind of loosely touched on, but I'll kind of finalize with, is, again, depending on where you are, but generally the amount of conveniences available are much, much greater in Southeast Asia than they are in Eastern Europe. If you want to have an abundance of different things, I think it's largely a function of population size. You simply just don't have nearly as many people. If you think Indonesia has more people than all Eastern Europe combined, sort of thing, that just gives you a broader range of stuff. And I'm a convenience guy. I like my conveniences a lot. So for me, it's really good that I can get things very quickly, very easily, that I can order from online and have access to lots of stuff. The online ordering is so-so depending on where you are in Eastern Europe and what you're looking for. The abundance of things to buy is lower, etc. But on the other hand, if you wanted to work towards, say, a second citizenship, it's basically impossible in most of these Southeast Asian countries, whereas it's quite possible in a lot of Eastern European countries. So I guess that's also a trade-off for you. Let me know what you guys think. Put it in the comments below, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you on the next video.